On October 7, 2022, the Malaysian Finance Minister Tengku Zafrul announced the budget 2023 for all of us Malaysians. I'm not going to go through a very detailed breakdown of everything because there are definitely much more elaborative content out there. But in this video, I'm going to cover what are the pertinent things as an investor that you should look out for, where should you follow the money trail, and potentially which companies will benefit from the biggest chunk of the budget allocation. So stay till the end of the video to find out all these opinions of mine. So as a disclaimer, whatever I say in this video does not constitute a buy or sell recommendation because that's a licensed activity. It is purely done for educational and mental model sharing purposes, and also some techniques on doing due diligence. So please speak to a licensed person if you do require licensed advice. So let's jump straight into the numbers. In 2023, the federal budget is expected to be 372 billion versus 385 billion in 2022. The budgeted number for 2022 was 332 billion, but it exceeded by quite a big chunk, I guess because of all the subsidies that the government is providing to society. Elevated crude oil prices is definitely one that has substantially increased the subsidies from the government. Second number that we should always look at is actually the operating expenditure, which is 272 billion. And last but not least, these two numbers which I'm going to focus on in this particular video. The first one is actually the development expenditure, 95 billion versus 71.8 billion in 2022, and emoluments, which is going to cost the government 91 billion, and this is an increase from 86.5 billion in 2022. Now, for those of you unaware, emoluments are actually salaries and whatever expenditure to the civil service of Malaysia, the government of Malaysia. So the Member of Parliament for Subang Jaya, Wong Chen, actually pointed out something very, very important, and I think that I should highlight this in this video as well, that the development expenditure has actually doubled from the previous years. While we see 2022 having a 72 billion development expenditure, but if you trace back a little bit further in 2019 and actually 2018, the development expenditure has actually ballooned to double. Now, 2018 saw an allocation of 46 billion and 2019 was only 54.7 billion. Now, obviously, who are the benefactors of the development expenditure would be people in the infrastructure works, people who are in the development works, people who are building things around society, and these are the guys who will benefit the most. Now, as an investor, obviously, this is where a good honeycomb is, but bear in mind that are these sustainable profits going forward, because this is on a yearly budget, and I personally don't like development or property companies because these are very lumpy kind of profits and they are not really sustainable going forward, unless we're talking about infrastructure where they're actually building on behalf of the government and they get some kind of a lease where there's a payback period where they are allowed to collect tolls and whatsoever. But even then, the toll or tariffs may be actually capped by the government. So personally for me, it doesn't necessarily need to apply to all of you, but personally for me, I don't really like development and construction companies. Therefore, for me, I focus on the emoluments, which is the salaries to the civil servants of Malaysia. Now, why do I focus on that? Because most of it is actually spent in consumer spending, because salary to the civil service, it gets trickled down into either products or services that is being provided in Malaysia, and it is kind of an OPEX consuming kind of money trickle or money trail, and therefore slightly more sustainable as comparatively to the development expenditure. Now, this chart just goes to show you the weightage of each allocation, 372 billion in terms of the budget for 2023. What is the biggest weightage of the expenditure? It's going to be into development expenditure as well as emoluments. Now, even though in the mainstream press you see all this headline news about all the assistance the government is providing, that only makes a sliver as compared to the entire pie of the government expenditure. Obviously, those headline items like the 100 ringgit touch and go kind of rebate to the M40s, it's minuscule comparatively to whatever we see in development expenditure as well as the emoluments. The other thing I like to point out is actually the debt service charges. I do not have the breakdown here based on a time series, but more and more the debt service charges for the Malaysian government has increased over the years. it's something that is not very sustainable, because if you are taking on more debts, that means there's more finance charges to be paid by the government because it's not collecting enough revenue in terms of taxes. For those of you who watched my video before, I'm a big proponent of bringing back the GST. Completely absent, obviously, because it's an election budget. But more importantly is this is a number that we have to watch if we don't want to go down the track of Sri Lanka and any other countries that have defaulted on the debt, countries like Greece as well. So focusing on emoluments, 2/5 of the federal government's revenue is spent paying the civil service. Now, I'm not going to go into the debate of whether our civil service is bloated. I leave that to the politicians. But what I'm more interested in is how do the civil service members actually spend their money, because since a big chunk of our federal government coffers are being spent on them, where are they spending the money? Follow the money. So the first hint that I got was this very interesting study done in 2018, and they found that civil servants spend more than half of their salaries repaying debts. So as you can see, 64% of the survey participants actually earn less than 5,000 ringgit a month. And here's what's even more surprising, 62% of these loans are actually from what we call NBFIs. What does NBFIs stand for? It stands for non-bank financial institutions. Now, I'm going to go into some examples of these, actually real-life case studies of these institutions that actually loan to the civil service. And ironically, one of them is owned majority by one of the largest banks in Malaysia as well. So focusing on not just the non-bank financial institutions, these are two banks, MBSB as well as Bank Rakyat, that do provide debt services to a huge chunk of the civil service. An example of a non-bank financial institution would be someone like Aeon Credit, and they're very famous for microcredit schemes that actually lend out money for very low ticket items, things like motorcycles, things like electrical appliances for your home. The other example of NBFI or non-bank financial institution is this guy called RCE Capital, and they are actually very good at their collection because they allow deduction of salary from this organization called Angkasa, and Angkasa actually has the power or the jurisdiction to actually be the deducting party from the salaries directly of the civil servants. And as you can see, this was a chart produced by analyst report by Maybank on RCE. The increase of the emoluments has seen the increase of RCE financing receivable. That means they've lent out more and they're being owed more because of the rise in emoluments of the government. So this is, for me, is a very direct correlated indication of how well RCE will do with the increase of emoluments for civil service of the government. So once these civil servants actually take out a lot of these debts, what do they spend it on? And in a report by Bank Negara, they actually broke down the key items that the civil service or even Malaysians actually spend this debt on. A big chunk of it goes to residential property, obviously, and second biggest chunk is motor vehicles, non-residential properties, and others. For the civil service, a big chunk of it actually goes into personal financing as well. And the educated guess that I can put in is probably things like to maintain their lifestyle, that they buy a little bit more luxurious items besides the motor vehicles. They eat out more, which I'm going to talk about later in the video. But in this particular slide, I wanted to focus on the big chunk, which is the residential property. And where are the concentration of civil service, especially in the Greater Klang Valley, would be in Putrajaya. So I'm going to dig up who are the developers mainly developing Putrajaya. These are the four that are on the slide as well: Putrajaya Perdana, IOI Properties, Gagasan Nadi Cergas, and SP Setia. Other than Putrajaya Perdana Berhad, IOI, Gagasan Nadi, and SP Setia are actually listed companies. So, so besides the residential properties, what will the civil servants or Malaysians in general, when they have excess money to actually, what do they spend on? And one hint that I normally like to look for is actually in the consumer price index. And this is the latest from the Department of Statistics. Showed an increase in four main areas. The first one is food and beverage. Second is furnishing, household equipment. Third is transport, and fourth is restaurants and hotels. Now, this is obvious with the opening up the economy since April this year. More people are actually eating outside, and where I want to focus on next is actually food away from home, where people actually go out to consume a meal rather than them buying groceries and cooking at home. So besides residential property, what do most of these civil servants actually spend their money on next? Is actually personal financing, and obviously it's such a wide category. They could be used to buy apparel, they could be used to buy other luxurious items, lifestyle items, but I'm going to focus on one through this clue given by the Consumer Price Index. And this is the latest data from DOSM, or the Department of Statistics Malaysia. It has shown inflation has increased by what I've highlighted is four main groups: food and beverage, furnishing, household equipment, transport, and last but not least, restaurants and hotels. Now, quite obvious, because of the opening of the economy since April this year has actually led to an increase. People are eating outside, people eating food away from home, and this is the next focus that I'm going to look at. And who are the beneficiary companies that might benefit from this, this increase in demand? Now, the majority of the civil servants are Muslims, and because of that, they need to consume halal food. So I went researching on what are the largest halal food chains or food restaurants within Malaysia. Obviously, the usual suspects would be KFC and McDonald's, but the other thing that I like to focus on, and being a consumer myself, is actually the Japanese restaurant food chains. Now, why do I say this? Is because my two children, they love eating Japanese food, and I always have a lookout on the Japanese food chains, food chain restaurants. And one that I personally don't go to is actually Sushi King. Why? Is I don't find the food very tasty, but apparently they have the largest halal Japanese food chain in Malaysia. And I was researching this company about a year ago, and the COVID pandemic actually benefited them. Why? Is because their competitors, restaurant chains like Sake Sushi, actually closed down. They couldn't survive, and because of that, it drove more customers towards Sushi King. The other restaurant chain that I think is quite popular is actually the Western restaurant chains like TGI Fridays, and this restaurant called the Teh Tarik Place. Just found out while I was researching for this video that there was a recent buyer to the entire chain, the TGI Fridays and the Teh Tarik Place, by this company called Sino Huaan International Berhad, now known as Tecna X, apparently. And so a lot of, I think the other one that that comes top of mind, especially in the areas of Putrajaya, is Taco Bell's. I haven't managed to find out who actually owns Taco Bell, whether they are actually publicly held, a publicly listed company. But yeah, there's something to watch out for as an investor too, because it's very popular among the Muslim community. I'm not a fan of Taco Bell food, but this is where once you see things on the ground, you observe, you form a mental model, and you start digging, and you start finding out whether the numbers you see correlate with what you see on the ground, because you can't be confining yourself to just reading on the internet. What you can do as a good investor is actually observe what's on the ground, visit their outlets, visit their facilities, and then you correlate that back with research through reading annual reports, reading company updates, looking for business news in the press, to actually solidify what you have in mind and what may be a potential investment. Last but not least, an important part of the economy for Malaysia is actually the motor vehicles industry. And in Malaysia, Malaysians roughly buy anywhere between 580 to 600,000 new vehicles, both for commercial consumption as well as personal consumption. And these are the usual suspects: UMW and MBM or MBMR Resources Berhad. These guys actually own the Toyota and the Perodua marquee in Malaysia. Tan Chong Motors, who actually owns the Nissan marquee in Malaysia. Berjaya Auto, that owns the Mazda marquee in Malaysia, as well as, if I'm not mistaken, they just recently bought Peugeot or Renault, either one of them. And last but not least, and also a very strong contender, is DRB Highcom with Oriental Holdings. They both co-own the Honda marquee in Malaysia. So it is, if you look at any normal life path of either a a graduate or a guy who starts working, they normally, the first thing once they buy after they hit a certain financial threshold is actually buying a new car. It's a sense of pride, it's a sense of achievement that they've gotten somewhere in life, and then they start looking for buying houses. Obviously it does differ individually, but on a general populace level, that is actually the normal path, financial spending path of a normal Malaysian. And it doesn't surprise me that, you know, even though we have not grown substantially in terms of motor vehicle consumption because of the population increase that we've not seen as comparatively to other countries within this region like Indonesia, Vietnam, but it does form a substantial part of financing, especially for civil servants, especially for Malaysians in general. And even though it's a depreciating asset, but again, as I said earlier, it's a sense of pride, it's a sense of milestone and achievement to celebrate. And yeah, it should not be ignored as an investor in Malaysia. So my concluding thoughts are this: as an ordinary citizen of Malaysia, we cannot influence how the budget is being allocated. However, we can make smart observations and do our own due diligence to follow where the money trail is. When we follow the money trail, we will kind of figure out what are the products or services that are being consumed, where this money is going to be allocated to, and that's where we can ride the growth of the companies that actually provide these products or services. As I record this video, the Malaysian Prime Minister Dato Sri Ismail Sabri has announced the dissolution of Parliament, and therefore Malaysians will head into the 15th general election. I do pray and hope for a better Malaysia. I do hope that the government will provide more clearer government policies, whoever is going to be elected into place, to reinvigorate, to create a more vibrant economy and capital markets that will encourage foreign direct investment to come into this country. We sorely need it. I'm also launching a face-to-face course on how to build your portfolio. If you're interested, do check out the links in the description and comment section below. I plan to run this only once a quarter, so if you're really interested, you know, click the registration as soon as you get it. And last but not least, I wish you all the best in your investing journey. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and it brought value to you, kindly consider subscribing to me, giving it a like, and hitting that notification bell so that the next videos will be notified to you when they're out. So see you.